Before you scroll past this, ask yourself one question. What if everything you needed to create focus, resilience, and inner power was already inside you and you just haven't activated it yet? Every morning, your brain and body are waiting for your first command, but most people waste it, giving their attention to stress, noise, and distraction. What if instead you used 30 seconds to reset your entire nervous system, lock in your mindset, and hardwire your brain for purpose? Let me show you 12 powerful things you can say to yourself each morning that will reprogram your mind, rewire your physiology, and build the life you're meant to lead. The human brain is a dynamic, adaptable system that responds continuously to internal dialogue. When we tell ourselves, I am in control of my mind, we are not engaging in wishful thinking. We are making a powerful declaration that actively influences how neural circuits behave. The prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for planning, focus, and decision-making, is particularly sensitive to language and intention. This region can override emotional reactivity from deeper brain areas like the amygdala, and it becomes more efficient through repeated self-directed statements. When reinforced daily, such affirmations rewire the circuitry that supports executive function. The result is a mind that's more focused, more resilient, and less prone to distraction or impulsive behavior. By stating intentional beliefs each morning, we essentially engage in a form of internal cognitive training. Over time, this affects both how we perceive ourselves and how we respond to the world. The feedback loop created between thought, action, and reinforcement strengthens with consistency. Waking up and affirming mental control doesn't just influence psychology, it changes the body's physiology as well. As we begin the day, our cortisol levels are naturally elevated. This is part of a healthy circadian rhythm that primes us for wakefulness and alertness. However, the way we think at this time can amplify or modulate that physiological arousal. If our first thoughts are chaotic, fearful, or self-defeating, those thoughts trigger limbic responses that can exaggerate stress. Conversely, deliberate self-talk like "I am in control of my outcomes" gives structure to mental activity and signals the nervous system to organize around a clear goal. This top-down influence from the brain to the body provides stability to the autonomic nervous system, which governs energy, attention, and emotional regulation. By grounding ourselves in intentional language, we reduce unnecessary sympathetic activation and shift toward a more adaptive physiological state. Over weeks and months, this has a measurable impact on both performance and mental health. Control over the mind does not imply that thoughts or emotions can be suppressed at will. Instead, it means recognizing the influence we have over where attention goes and what beliefs are reinforced. Attention is one of the most valuable cognitive resources, and it's shaped heavily by what we focus on first thing in the morning. Neural mechanisms such as selective attention and working memory are sculpted by repetition. The more often you tell yourself that your mind is under your guidance, the more likely you are to behave in alignment with that belief, even when challenges arise. What begins as a conscious practice gradually becomes automatic. That shift from conscious control to subconscious behavior is what creates consistency. This transformation requires effort, but becomes increasingly effortless with time. Neural circuits that support self-regulation grow stronger, much like muscles do with consistent training. Thought patterns that previously led to distraction or anxiety become less dominant. You've effectively trained the brain to favor constructive mental states. The implications for performance, well-being, and even health are significant. When individuals internalize the idea that they can control their reactions, they become more adaptable under pressure. Studies in cognitive neuroscience have shown that belief systems alter how the brain interprets uncertainty and risk. People who affirm personal agency are less likely to fall into learned helplessness, a state where the brain shuts down motivation in response to repeated stress. This mental posture leads to better decision-making, enhanced creativity, and stronger social interactions. Control doesn't mean rigidity, it means flexibility. The ability to choose a response rather than react impulsively. That level of control begins with thought. It begins with choosing the narrative that your mind serves you each day. And just as a muscle strengthens with resistance, so too does your capacity for intentional thought with each repetition. This is not just psychological optimism. It is neural conditioning. Many people underestimate the power of internal dialogue because the effects are not immediate. But from a neuroscience perspective, every thought you repeat is a stimulus. Just as you would train a dog with repetition and reward, you train your nervous system with affirmations and emotional associations. The brain doesn't know the difference between external instruction and internal language. Both create chemical and electrical responses. When you begin your day by asserting control over your mindset, you are actually training the neuromodulatory systems like dopamine and acetylcholine pathways to prioritize that focus. These systems act as amplifiers, enhancing your ability to pursue goals and maintain attention. You're not just making yourself feel better, you're setting the stage for high-performance cognition. Over time, the brain treats these morning affirmations as reliable anchors, linking them to identity and habit. The result is that the brain becomes more efficient at engaging in goal-directed behavior. To be clear, control does not mean elimination of difficulty or the absence of negative emotion. It means presence. It means being aware of where your focus is going and making deliberate decisions about what mental content you reinforce. Affirming that I am in control of my mind is not about ignoring pain or pretending struggle doesn't exist. It's about reclaiming the narrative of the day before external events can dictate it. The brain is naturally drawn to novelty, threat, and uncertainty. Without intention, it will default to those pathways. But with deliberate repetition, we can create competing neural patterns that are grounded in purpose and clarity. This morning ritual becomes a scaffold for attention. And attention is the currency of consciousness. It determines what becomes real to us. With enough consistency, those morning words stop being something we say and start being something we live. Even in the most high-stress environments, individuals who practice intentional self-talk report improved focus and emotional resilience. In fact, the military, elite sports programs, and high-performance labs often incorporate this practice into morning routines. What we are really talking about is building cognitive pre-leading, preparing the mind in advance for the stressors and tasks of the day. The more predictable your internal world becomes, the more adaptive you are to the unpredictable external world. The sense of control that emerges isn't fake. It's grounded in how the brain integrates past experience, current state, and future goals. Morning affirmations create continuity between these layers of perception. They provide a signal to the brain that we are not passive observers, but active participants in shaping our internal environment. That belief, when cultivated regularly, affects everything from posture to voice tone to reaction time. Repeated daily, these affirmations serve as emotional stabilizers. They condition the nervous system to expect focus rather than chaos, clarity rather than confusion. Just as athletes warm up their bodies before peak performance, the mind must be primed for optimal function. The words you choose each morning literally set the initial direction of your brain's activity for the day. And because of how neurochemical priming works, those initial patterns will bias your perception, behavior, and choices over the next several hours. You're not just deciding how to feel, you're shaping what you're capable of noticing and doing. This is the power of morning mental training. It's free, immediate, and supported by science. The biggest barrier is consistency, not effectiveness. Most people underestimate how much these simple rituals matter until they experience the change firsthand. But the data is clear. Thoughts lead behavior, and repeated behavior reshapes the brain. At the core of all this lies a simple but profound truth. What you say to yourself changes what your brain becomes good at doing. Telling yourself that you are in control of your mind doesn't mean you'll never feel overwhelmed or uncertain. It means you'll respond to those moments with greater clarity and skill. Your internal language sets up a relationship between intention and identity. Over time, you become the type of person who can focus under pressure, recover from setbacks, and move toward goals with steadiness. This kind of self-leadership is not a personality trait, it is a trainable capacity. The earlier in the day you start reinforcing this, the more dominant it becomes. With repetition, your nervous system begins to trust your words. The result is not just self-belief, but neurobiological alignment. Your thoughts, body, and actions all pointed in the same direction. Challenges by their very nature are disruptive. They force us out of habitual patterns and place us in unfamiliar territory. While many interpret these moments as setbacks, the brain interprets them as signals for growth. When a challenge arises, neural circuits are destabilized just enough to create the possibility of rewiring. This is neuroplasticity in action. At the cellular level, the brain is designed to adapt to novel stimuli, especially when combined with focused attention and emotional salience. The presence of uncertainty enhances the release of neuromodulators like norepinephrine, which increases alertness and primes the brain for learning. This is the critical window where framing becomes everything. If a challenge is seen as threatening, it activates stress circuits that promote avoidance and cognitive shutdown. But if the same event is framed as an opportunity, it mobilizes learning and behavioral adaptation. The story we tell ourselves in these moments determines how the brain encodes and responds. Every obstacle contains within it the conditions required for mental remodeling. When we affirm that a challenge is a neuroplastic opportunity, we are activating the circuits of meaning and purpose, particularly within the medial prefrontal cortex. This region integrates experience with a sense of identity and future projection. As we face stress with the belief that it serves a higher function, the brain links that stress to progress. This alters the entire neurochemical profile of the experience. Instead of chronic cortisol flooding the system and impairing memory, we get an optimized release of dopamine, which enhances motivation and fortifies the learning process. The brain, especially in its adult form, requires friction to evolve. Just like muscle fibers require micro tears to grow stronger, the brain requires challenges to restructure itself. This is not a metaphor, it is a biological fact. Discomfort, properly framed, is fuel for transformation. Stress, in this context, is not an enemy, but a guide. Acute stress, experienced during challenges, activates systems that heighten focus and pattern recognition. These moments make the brain more sensitive to feedback, both internal and external. When someone experiences failure, the brain records not only what went wrong, but how it felt, how it was interpreted, and what behaviors followed. This complex encoding is what allows for future refinement. If the experience is contextualized as evidence of inadequacy, the brain builds a map around avoidance. But if it is interpreted as raw data for improvement, the brain opens up to new strategies. The difference lies not in the event itself, but in how attention and belief are directed in the moment. The stress response can either narrow our perspective or expand our learning potential, and that direction is chosen internally. Framing becomes a neurological steering mechanism. Repetition of this mindset enhances brain plasticity over time. When a person habitually frames difficulty as a growth opportunity, they strengthen the networks responsible for cognitive flexibility. These include the anterior cingulate cortex and dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, regions involved in error detection, conflict resolution, and adaptive planning. As these circuits become more efficient, they allow for quicker recovery from setbacks and more creative problem solving. People begin to see problems as puzzles rather than threats. This reappraisal doesn't remove the challenge, it transforms the emotional landscape around it. What once caused shutdown now activates curiosity. The result is a nervous system calibrated not just for survival, but for intelligent adaptation. By leaning into adversity, the brain becomes structurally and functionally more capable. This process doesn't require perfection, only consistency in how events are interpreted and responded to. Emotions are key to this transformation. Neuroplastic change is most powerful when emotions are involved because they amplify signal strength in the brain. This is why deeply painful or meaningful experiences are remembered vividly. They are chemically prioritized for encoding. In the context of challenges, harnessing emotions like determination, curiosity, or even frustration can focus the mind and enhance learning. The critical point is to avoid emotional overwhelm. When emotions exceed a certain threshold, the brain shifts into defensive modes that impair learning and shrink the window for plasticity, but within a manageable range. Emotions are catalysts. They increase the likelihood that a person will form new associations, try new approaches, and retain what they learn. In this way, challenges become high-leverage moments. The nervous system is most malleable when it is emotionally engaged and cognitively stretched just beyond its comfort zone. Another important component is behavioral activation. Thinking differently about challenges is only the first step. Acting in alignment with that belief reinforces the neuroplastic process. Each time we take action in the face of difficulty, we send a powerful signal to the brain. This is a valuable experience worth learning from. The motor systems of the brain, once engaged, help solidify cognitive and emotional changes through embodied practice. This is where repetition matters most. One encounter with stress doesn't create lasting change, but repeated engagement does. The more we practice leaning into discomfort with intention, the more automatic that response becomes. Over time, the stressor loses its edge not because it's easier, but because our brain has become stronger. This feedback loop, challenge, action, learning, repetition, is the engine of adaptive growth. It is not passive. It must be cultivated. We often associate growth with inspiration or insight, but the deeper truth is that growth happens most reliably through discomfort and correction. The nervous system thrives on feedback, especially the kind that reveals a mismatch between expectation and outcome. These errors are gold mines for plasticity. The brain interprets them as opportunities to update its model of the world. This is why challenges that defy prediction are so powerful. They demand that the brain revise itself. But for that revision to be positive, the experience must be met with an attitude of openness. The moment we label a challenge as useless or unfair, we shut down the feedback loop. But if we maintain curiosity, even in the face of failure, the brain remains in a learning state. This mindset doesn't just make us feel better, it reshapes the efficiency and structure of our neural pathways over time. Social context also plays a role. When individuals are supported in viewing challenges as opportunities, the effect on neuroplasticity is amplified. Social reinforcement, whether through language, modeling, or encouragement, signals safety to the brain. This reduces the defensive response to stress and expands cognitive bandwidth. In group settings like classrooms, teams, or organizations, this collective framing can create cultures of resilience. The brain is wired to mirror others. So when one person leans into a challenge with determination, it can neurologically influence those around them. This is not just psychological, it's neurobiological. Synchronization. Shared narratives around adversity can turn individual efforts into communal adaptation, and this communal adaptation becomes a reinforcing environment that makes it easier for everyone to grow. Breath is the only physiological function that is both automatic and under conscious control, making it a unique access point to the nervous system. Every inhale and exhale carries the potential to shift our mental and physical state. The breath acts as a bridge between the brain and body, regulating systems like heart rate, stress response, and emotional tone. When we say, "My breath anchors my mind and physiology," we're acknowledging its role as a stabilizing force, something we can control even when the external world feels chaotic. Through specific breathing techniques, we can influence the autonomic nervous system, shifting from states of anxiety to calm or from fatigue to alertness. The power of this lies not in belief, but in biology. Slow, deliberate breathing engages the vagus nerve, which helps lower heart rate and reduce cortisol levels. This biological shift feeds back into the brain, creating mental clarity and focus. In this way, breath becomes a tool for regulation, not just relaxation. Morning is a critical time to leverage this tool because the body is transitioning from a resting state to one of activity. Upon waking, cortisol levels are naturally elevated as part of the body's circadian rhythm. While this surge is normal and healthy, it can lead to feelings of tension or restlessness if not directed appropriately. Conscious breathing in the morning allows us to harness this arousal rather than be overwhelmed by it. Even just 2 to 5 minutes of nasal, diaphragmatic breathing can downregulate stress signals and set a tone of balance for the day. This simple act sends a message to the brain that the environment is safe, lowering limbic system activity and freeing up the prefrontal cortex for focused thinking. Breathing becomes the first act of conscious control, reminding the brain that regulation starts from within. This helps anchor attention, aligning the mind and body in preparation for goal-directed behavior. When breath leads, the brain follows. The physiology behind this process is well understood. Breathing through the nose, particularly with extended exhales, increases activity in the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. This branch is responsible for rest, digestion, and recovery. And it acts as a counterbalance to the sympathetic system, which drives fight or flight responses. When we feel anxious or overstimulated, the sympathetic system is often overactive. Breath control allows us to shift this balance. Inhaling briefly and exhaling slowly, often in a 1-2 ratio, signals the brain to slow down, promoting a sense of groundedness and clarity. This is not about disengaging from the world, but about becoming more capable of engaging with it from a centered state. The mind, when anchored in breath, is less reactive and more responsive. It perceives challenges as manageable, decisions as clearer, and distractions as less compelling. All of this begins with air moving through the body, timed with intention. This effect extends beyond physiology and into attention itself. Breathing anchors the mind by acting as a focal point, which helps reduce cognitive fragmentation. In a world filled with sensory input and constant demands, attention can become scattered and inefficient. By returning to the breath, we give the mind a stable reference point, a low-friction anchor that's always available. This reduces mental noise and sharpens focus. When practiced consistently, this breath awareness becomes a kind of internal compass, especially under stress. It helps reestablish orientation when the mind feels lost or overstimulated. The consistency of the breath creates predictability, which the brain interprets as safety. This perceived safety allows higher cognitive functions to activate more reliably. Creativity, strategic thinking, and empathy all emerge more readily from a brain that's not stuck in a threat detection loop. Breath quiets that loop, giving the mind space to operate at its best. It's also worth recognizing how breathing influences energy. Shallow, rapid breaths, common in anxious states, lead to inefficient oxygen exchange and increased carbon dioxide retention. This imbalance can trigger a sense of breathlessness or panic, even when there is no real danger. On the other hand, slow, deep breathing improves oxygenation and maintains proper pH levels in the blood. This not only improves physiological performance, but enhances mood and mental stamina. Morning breath work, therefore, is not just about calming down, it's about optimizing alertness in a sustainable way. Techniques such as cyclic sighing, box breathing, or coherence breathing can be tailored to produce different outcomes, energizing, focusing, or relaxing. The brain, receiving these signals, adjusts neuromodulator levels accordingly, shifting the internal chemistry to match the desired state. It is a dialogue between the lungs and the cortex, one that determines how the day begins. Breath also influences emotion, and not in abstract ways. Emotional states like anger, fear, or joy are closely tied to specific breathing patterns. When we change those patterns, we interrupt the emotional loop. For instance, anger is typically associated with short, shallow breathing and muscle tension. By introducing slow, deep breathing during moments of agitation, we reduce the physiological support for that emotion, making it easier to de-escalate. In the same way, breath can amplify positive states. Smiling combined with rhythmic breathing can reinforce feelings of gratitude or joy, creating a positive feedback loop. Over time, the body becomes conditioned to associate breath patterns with specific emotional outcomes. This gives us the ability to self-modulate rather than be swept away by reactivity. It turns emotional regulation into a skill, one built on rhythm and repetition. Morning breath work becomes the first practice in this training. Another critical element is how breath connects us to the present. The mind often races between past events and future anxieties, but the breath exists only now. It is immediate, tangible, and always accessible. Anchoring attention to the breath pulls awareness out of rumination and into presence. This is not just a meditative ideal, it is a cognitive shift. Present moment awareness increases interoceptive sensitivity, meaning we become more aware of signals from the body. This leads to better decision-making, quicker stress recognition, and enhanced emotional clarity. Instead of reacting from habit or fear, we respond from awareness. Breath does not require belief, only attention, and by paying attention to it, we build the capacity to notice other subtle signals throughout the day. This self-awareness becomes a foundation for emotional intelligence and behavioral consistency. It starts with something as simple as an inhale and an exhale. The consistency of morning breath work reinforces neural patterns of regulation. Each day, when we begin with intentional breathing, we strengthen the brain-body communication loop. This process enhances cortical thickness in regions associated with attention, emotion regulation, and sensory awareness. Over time, These changes result in better stress resilience, lower baseline anxiety, and more stable mood. These are not just subjective reports. They are measurable, structural adaptations in the brain. The breath, as a repeated input, becomes a tuning mechanism. It fine-tunes both the brain and body for optimal performance, helping us enter the day with a sense of agency and calm. Without this anchor, attention is left vulnerable to whatever external stimulus dominates. With it, we maintain an internal reference point that keeps us grounded amid change. Breath builds the habit of returning to center. It's important to remember that control over breath equals control over reaction. In moments where events escalate or emotions spike, the breath is the first and fastest way to intervene. Unlike thoughts, which may spiral, or behaviors which require planning, breath can shift physiology in seconds. This makes it the ultimate tool for immediate recalibration. Morning breath practice trains this skill before it's needed in high-stress moments. Like rehearsing for a performance, it builds the muscle memory of regulation. The more often we practice this in calm states, the more easily we access it in chaotic ones. Breath becomes both a proactive and reactive tool, centering us at the start of the day and recalibrating us as needed. In this way, it becomes more than a practice, it becomes a mindset, one that recognizes calm as an active state, cultivated by deliberate rhythm and mindful attention. Gratitude is a powerful modulator of the human nervous system. When genuinely experienced, it shifts the brain's activity away from circuits associated with threat detection and toward those that promote connection, safety, and long-term perspective. This shift is not merely philosophical, it is physiological. Expressing or reflecting on gratitude activates neural networks in the prefrontal cortex and deep limbic structures, particularly the hypothalamus and the ventral striatum. These areas are responsible for mood regulation, motivation, and even immune response. Gratitude releases dopamine and serotonin, enhancing our sense of well-being and reinforcing the behaviors that led to those emotional states. This means gratitude is not just a feeling, but a feedback loop. The more we practice it, the easier it becomes to access, and the more it changes the brain's wiring. Each morning, deliberately activating gratitude prepares the mind to interpret the world with greater resilience and flexibility. The brain is a prediction machine constantly scanning for what might go wrong. This negativity bias has evolutionary advantages. It helped our ancestors survive, but it creates a modern imbalance. Without intentional effort, the mind defaults to scanning for threats, errors, or shortcomings. Gratitude interrupts this cycle by deliberately spotlighting what is working, what is present, and what is supportive. When we say, gratitude is my emotional baseline, we are training the brain to return to appreciation as a default mode. This doesn't ignore hardship, it reframes it. It's a choice to begin the day from abundance rather than lack. And that shift has downstream effects on attention, memory, and mood. People who begin the day with gratitude tend to be more adaptive, more solution-oriented, and less reactive to stress. This isn't optimism for the sake of comfort. It's a cognitive strategy grounded in biology. Morning is a neurochemically rich window. Cortisol levels rise naturally to help us wake up. But without direction, this can lead to anxiety or restlessness. Gratitude acts as a counterweight. When practiced intentionally during this window, it helps regulate the cortisol response and promotes parasympathetic activation, which calms the body and clarifies the mind. Even a brief gratitude practice, a single thought held for 60 seconds, can create measurable changes in heart rate variability and reduce markers of inflammation. It's not the complexity of the ritual that matters, but the sincerity and attention we bring to it. Gratitude practiced consistently over time enhances the tone of our autonomic nervous system, allowing us to stay calm and regulated even in the face of adversity. It essentially preconditions our emotional landscape, shaping how we interpret and respond to the day's challenges. This subtle shift can have compounding effects across our entire psychology. There's also a structural component to gratitude. Repeated engagement with grateful thinking strengthens the medial prefrontal cortex, an area involved in value judgment, social connection, and emotional regulation. When this region becomes more active and integrated, we become more attuned to positive social cues and more effective in maintaining emotional balance. Gratitude wires the brain to notice support, opportunity, and connection where before it might have only seen risk or isolation. This enhanced perception isn't about denying reality, it's about perceiving more of it. In this way, gratitude increases cognitive bandwidth. The more we practice recognizing what's good, the more we notice subtle signals that guide effective behavior. Relationships improve, decision-making sharpens, and we find ourselves more open to collaboration and less bound by defensiveness. The effect is both inward and outward, restructuring our self-perception and our view of others. Emotionally, gratitude reduces the intensity and frequency of negative affect. Studies show that regular gratitude practice lowers symptoms of depression and anxiety, not by suppressing negative emotions, but by providing a broader emotional context. When gratitude becomes habitual, the brain learns that pain and appreciation can coexist. This dual awareness increases resilience, the capacity to remain functional and connected in the face of difficulty. Gratitude doesn't erase suffering, but it transforms its narrative. It reminds us of what remains, what we've endured, and what continues to support us. This mental framing reduces emotional volatility and increases our ability to self-soothe. When practiced first thing in the morning, it sets a tone of inner stability, allowing us to approach the day with grounded optimism. This isn't about toxic positivity. It's about building emotional range. Gratitude enhances emotional depth and flexibility. The body mirrors the emotional state created by gratitude. When we feel genuinely thankful, our posture shifts, our breathing slows, and our muscular tension decreases. These somatic markers feed back into the brain and reinforce the feeling itself. This loop of physiological and emotional feedback creates a state of coherence where heart, mind, and body align. Morning gratitude enhances this coherence, making it easier to act with intention rather than reaction. It strengthens our ability to stay aligned with our values even under stress. And because the brain prioritizes emotionally meaningful experiences in memory, the emotional tone set by gratitude tends to persist throughout the day. This increases our likelihood of interpreting events through a lens of opportunity rather than threat. In this way, gratitude is not only a morning ritual, but a day-long compass. Socially, gratitude improves connection. When we reflect on the people, experiences, or opportunities we appreciate, we become more open and generous in our behavior. This is because gratitude activates the brain's social bonding circuitry, releasing oxytocin and increasing empathy. Starting the day with thoughts of gratitude prepares us to interact more patiently, more compassionately, and more effectively. Our tone changes, our listening improves, and others, consciously or not, respond to that shift. This has ripple effects. Our emotional baseline can influence the mood and behavior of those around us. In teams, families, or communities, one person's grateful state can shift the tone for others. In this way, gratitude becomes a relational force, not just an individual habit. It sets off a chain reaction of emotional alignment that improves group dynamics and deepens trust. Gratitude also protects us from ego reactivity. When we are anchored in a sense of enoughness, we become less vulnerable to status comparison, envy, or defensiveness. The mind becomes less preoccupied with proving itself and more focused on contributing. This shift reduces the internal noise that often hijacks our energy and attention. By making gratitude our default, we build a more stable identity, one not easily shaken by criticism or inflated by praise. This increases authenticity because our thoughts and actions are less driven by insecurity. We act from clarity, not compensation. Morning gratitude helps install this orientation before the demands of the world start pulling us in different directions. It's a daily investment in psychological sovereignty. It reminds us that joy, purpose, and meaning don't need to be earned through achievement. They can be accessed through awareness. The practice of gratitude, like any neural habit, requires repetition. It's not about feeling grateful only when circumstances align. It's about choosing to remember what supports us, regardless of circumstance. This repetition builds emotional literacy. We begin to recognize the subtle differences between forced positivity and authentic appreciation. We become more discerning about what genuinely brings value into our lives. This discernment helps us prioritize our energy and attention. Over time, the morning practice of gratitude creates a lens of discernment, allowing us to spot what truly matters amidst the noise. It fosters a mindset of conscious selection rather than passive consumption. That alone is transformative. Gratitude, practiced deliberately, becomes a system for aligning attention, behavior, and values in a way that's both grounded and elevated. Ultimately, morning gratitude is a tool for shaping perception, physiology, and identity. It prepares the brain to seek out signals of meaning and connection. It calms the nervous system, enhances attention, and improves emotional stability.